This is a discussion on popular mechanics by Raymond Carver. Before we get into the facets of the story itself and that big kind of surprise at the end, um, I wanted to point out two things about this story that may kind of help you in your understanding, your further understanding. So, Popular Mechanics was the name of a popular magazine that was kind of famous for DIYers. It had a lot of suggestions and steps for home improvement projects around the house. And so they were kind of like these stripped down steps for home improvement. And so I think that's important here for you to kind of keep on the back burner in your mind. The second thing that I want to point out is that in this story, there's an allusion to the story of King Solomon from the Bible. And without getting really heavy into the biblical side of the story, I want to kind of give you a stripped down version of the King Solomon story if you're unfamiliar. But these two women came before King Solomon, who was very wise king. He was known for his wisdom and his just decisions and his rule. So these two women, they come before King Solomon, and they're both claiming ownership over a baby. And this one's saying this is my baby, and this one's saying this is my baby, and there's a lot of discrepancy on who the baby belongs to. And so King Solomon gets this idea to flesh out the true mother of the baby. And he tells the two women that he has a great solution to this problem. What they'll do is they'll split the baby in half, and then each woman can have a half of the baby. And so the first woman says, "Oh, that sounds like a great idea. We're both going to win. We'll both have half the baby." She's probably not the brightest crayon in the box there. But the other woman immediately pops up and said, "Give the baby to her." And so, based on that reaction, we know who the true mother of the baby is. It's not the woman that was okay with splitting it down the middle, and giving half to each, but it was the woman that was prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice in losing her son to protect his life. And so I want you to keep that story, that biblical parable, in the back of your head as we talk about popular mechanics. Let's talk about the shell of the story and a couple of the features. The point of view, we know that this is not told by either the man or the woman. Instead, we have a third person narrator, an outside narrator who is not a character in the story, who is giving us insight on both the woman and the man, and then what's happening in this room while they are having this argument. The theme of this story is conflict, obviously. There's a fight and separation. And without getting too gory, it's not only a figurative separation or a breaking apart of their family unit, but there also is a very literal separation, a very um, physical separation at the end, and we'll talk about that in just a second. The style of this story is very minimalist. There's this stripped down diction, plot, and syntax. It's a very simple story, simple language, simple style, sentence structure, a lot of short staccato sentences. Bring that back. Are you crazy? I want the baby. Stripped down syntax and diction, but it's packed with so much meaning. And Carver is very popular for this style. There are no, there are very brief paragraphs. There's no complicated steps in this suggestion for home improvement um, here. So, domestic dispute, husband and wife. She's leaving, he's packing a suitcase. And so they're here. Uh, the baby is there in the room. He's packing a suitcase. They're screaming at each other, cursing, screaming, crying. Very emotional, very hysterical conversation. They're yelling back and forth, and then she notices the baby's picture on the bed and picks it up. And so we think, oh wow, here's a moment in time where she's going to come to her senses and think, oh, here's this baby, we've got to solve this, we've got to make this okay for the baby. And then she takes it with her and goes into the living room. And he's like, bring that back. Bring the picture back. So he finishes his packing. He goes into the kitchen and she's holding the baby. And he says, I want the baby. She's like, are you crazy? Nope, I want the baby. I'm going to take him and I'll send somebody to get his things. And she says, you're not touching this baby. Okay? So the baby's beginning to cry. And she takes the blanket off and covers him. And then she's trying to comfort him in some way. Oh, she says, looking at the baby. And he moves towards her. Okay? So they've had a verbal altercation. She's holding the baby. He wants the baby. She says he's not taking the baby. And the baby is kind of caught in between this situation and the yelling, and he starts to cry. And the father begins to move toward her. Okay? I want the baby. Screaming. Okay? She turned and tried to hold the baby over a corner behind the stove. So she's trying to move the baby out of harm's way. And he comes up and he reaches across and he grabs the baby. Okay, so here they are. It's turned from a physical altercation into a very physical. Did I say verbal? I'm sorry. It's turned from a verbal altercation into a very physical altercation, and not with them in each other, like a physical against each other. They're physically wrestling, grappling with this baby. The baby is red faced and screaming. They're knocking stuff off the shelves, and he's slamming her into the wall, trying to get her to break her grip. He's got a holding on to the baby, and he's pulling and pushing with all his weight. She's got a hold of the baby, and she's pulling with all her weight. And he says, "You're hurt." She says, "You're hurting the baby." "I'm not hurting the baby. You're hurting the baby." Okay, so in the dark, he's trying to get her to release the baby. The baby's still screaming. She feels the baby. He's trying to pry her fingers off the baby, and she feels the baby leaving from her hands. And so, just as her hands come loose, she grabs for the baby's other arm, and she caught the baby around the wrist and leaned back. He would not let go. He felt the baby slipping out of his hands, and he pulled back very hard. In this manner, the issue was decided. Powerful, crazy, startling, yes. They're holding him over the stove. They're pulling at him from both sides. They're focusing only on their own wishes. I want the baby, and I want the baby. You're not getting the baby. I'm not going to let you have it. And not focusing on the baby's safety. They're holding him over a stove. Hopefully it wasn't on, but that wasn't the bigger issue here. Let's talk about the treatment of the baby for a second. So, besides the physical treatment, not one time in the entire passage is the baby identified by gender, by name. They refer to it as it. You are hurting it. she would have this baby. There is no my baby, this child, Joe, or whatever his name is. It's a very selfish situation where the baby is no longer a living human being. It is an object to be divided amongst them. If he's leaving, he's not taking the baby, and she's not keeping the baby, in his opinion. Also, pay attention to the increasing darkness in the house. Like at the beginning of the story, it's like kind of a shift, kind of like the flowers. So early today, it was getting dark, but it was getting dark on the inside too. So it wasn't only a darkness outside, but it was also getting dark on the inside, a very dark atmosphere. What's happening is very dark. Um, Neither one of them accept responsibility. You're hurting the baby. I'm not hurting the baby. You're hurting the baby. Kind of a back and forth, like you would argue over the last piece of pie as a dessert. It was a very detached approach. The last line, in this manner, the issue was decided. The issue was decided who was getting the baby because they literally pulled the baby apart. Probably not in all graphic terms, physically ripped him apart. But that's what it's alluding to. With her pulling one arm as hard as she can in one direction, him pulling the other arm in as hard as he could in the other direction. They literally kill the baby fighting over him. And in this manner, the issue was decided. He was determined she wasn't getting the baby. She was determined he wasn't getting the baby. And in the end, they were both right. Okay? So, keep all those things in mind. That stripped down story, how powerful it is, how powerful that last line really is. It just goes to show you that some of the writer's most important tools that they have, he has or she has at their disposal, is the placement of strategically written lines. And where they can show that off the most, just like you can, is in an introduction and a conclusion. Talk about leaving a powerful image as your last statement in a story. That's a very powerful image, but told in a way that was very detached. In this manner, the issue was decided. Still not a baby, still an it. Now it's the issue. Okay, so good piece. Everybody always accuses me of choosing really dark and twisty stories. I particularly like this story, not for the obvious reasons, but because it's just a powerful style of writing that is very, very effective. So hopefully you understand it a little bit better now, and we'll catch up next time.